Greetings. Welcome to part 17 of our projected 24-part series on politics in America called Dysphoria, featuring the wrong hero. That's me. Well, sir, like this, see? Seems as though I still have this chewy mint in my mouth, so I can't really talk too well. Also, I was supposed to be at work 8 hours ago. Oh well. Another day, another dolor. Anyway, where are we here? Yes, what were we talking about last week? Well, scarcely matters. Nobody was listening anyway. Gee, it's really too bad. NBC weapons. NBC. Nuclear, biological, chemical weapons. Just one part of that cosmic din, which is dysphoria. The secret FBI militia alliance, as outlined in U.S. News and World Report of May 12th. But we'll not talk about that because that's classified. Al Gore says he's a centrist, but he has to get nominated in a party that skews left. So, like Gephardt, Gore has begun to cater to key interest groups. The AFL-CIO, Medicare, of course the Teamsters, and their wonderful strike. At some point, Gore will have to take on Gephardt, and Clinton will be in his vice president's corner, says the astute Gloria Borger. Well, I certainly hope he is. I mean, Al's got enough dirt on Bill. Oh, not supposed to talk about that. Well, let's talk a little bit about what the New Republic had to say about state-run lotteries. This, of course, is a favorite bête noire of mine. The nation's 38 state lotteries offer a very poor, very distant shot at winning anything of value. State lotteries are the antithesis of the American dream, according to Robin Geary. They are mechanisms by which the state seduces its citizens with the promise of riches, suckering them into gambling away their incomes and their unemployment checks. You are more likely to be struck by lightning or find a pearl in an oyster than you are to win a multi-million-dollar jackpot. The states could raise this money openly through taxes, but taxes make voters angry. Lottery players, on the other hand, don't get angry because they choose to purchase tickets. So I'm not paying taxes because I'm not buying lottery tickets. Nah. Lottery commissioners are public entities and as such are not subject to the FTC regulations that mandate truth in advertising. Well, that's something interesting to know. I'll repeat it. Lottery commissioners are public entities and as such are not subject to the FTC regulations that mandate truth in advertising. So the next time you're off watching that ad for the lottery, just keep that in mind. One infamous Illinois ad placed on a billboard in one of Chicago's poorest neighborhoods in the 1980s read, "This could be your way out." The dynamic of any vice is constant destruction and renewal. As addicts burn out, new addicts must be recruited. Another dynamic is progression. The jaded addict requires stronger wine, faster cars. I like that, jaded addict. You could say that that is a pretty good description of me. Jaded addict. I'm going to put that on my unemployment form. Occupation, jaded addict. The per capita annual lottery expenditure in Chelsea, Mass. is how much? $115, and in Lincoln, Mass., it's just $30. The lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which they paid serious attention. It was their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulant, says George Orwell in 1984. Oing, 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 oing. Bill Weld, just to get back onto Massachusetts for a minute, has spent his whole life flitting propitiously from one peach job to another, propelled by a bizarre mixture of perfect self-confidence, first-rate intellect, and no Protestant work ethic. Well, also, he's also got great poise as well, and that counts for a lot in politics, because after all, as Florence King said in the National Review of May 16th, we have democratized nihilism. Sir Geoffrey Jackson, the British diplomat, was kidnapped by Tupamaro guerrillas in Uruguay in 1971. When his captors announced he was now being held in a people's prison, he politely contradicted them. Not at all. It is you who are now in the British embassy. Please make yourself at home. He went on to claim that the embassy was wherever the ambassador happened to be. This infuriated his hosts, who eventually released him as a humanitarian gesture, according to John O'Sullivan. So that's great. The British Embassy is wherever the ambassador happens to be. Are Californians required to keep gender and race preferences? The 14th Amendment does not require what it barely permits, says Diarmid Disk-Anlane. Liberals don't care what you volunteer for as long as it's compulsory, says, presumably this is William F. Buckley himself, speaking through his mouthpiece, the National Review. The worst contagious diseases afflicting the human beings descended from animals' diseases. Well, my old pal, that Polish fella, what is his name? He's the one that did all those weird drawings of gorillas and compared them to King Farouk and labor leader John L. Lewis. Slaughtermir Zlazewski or something like that. He says the same thing about syphilis. Of course, scientists have known this for years. They believe syphilis came from either goats or apes or sheep. In fact, many of the most contagious viruses which have afflicted mankind for the past couple of thousand of years, if not several thousand years, have been due to the fact that hunter-gatherers have become agrarian farmers and have kept wild animals as domesticated animals, and of course those animals serve as vectors for the viruses which mutate to be able to afflict humans. Now the thing with a virus is if it kills off the human host too quickly, it's not an effective virus. The best viruses, from the virus's viewpoint, are those which remain dormant for many years, much like radical conservatism, and only eventually flare up to destroy their victim. In the interim, of course, they have spread to other susceptible human hosts. Reporters must strive for balance, even at the risk of producing bland prose. Elusive though it may be, objectivity is still the goal, and stories that do not aspire to it should be clearly labeled as opinion pieces, says Nurith C. Eisenman in the Washington Monthly of May 1997. Almost every movement, political, pseudo-religious, or otherwise, will be taken over sooner or later by the lunatic fringe, which will turn it from a perfectly valid and respectable outfit into a laughing stock. The reason for this is that the lunatic fringe are the fanatics who are willing to fight tooth and nail for not 1 inch. The others either give in or leave. Well, that's what they say. That's how they say the communists took over the labor unions in the 30s and 40s. That's how some have suggested the right-wing militia movements and the Christian coalition types have more or less undermined the Republican Party. And, of course, we know about the McGovernites in, yes, 1968, but especially in 1972. Of course, I would hardly rank the McGovernites as a radical group. That honor probably belongs more to organizations such as the Weathermen and the Black Panthers. If you want to live honorably in politics and not sell influence over your official acts, you are always desperately searching for clean favors you can do for those who have helped you. For example, like giving out low number license plates and such. A Catholic church in Lyon, Spain, recently installed an automatic teller machine to allow worshippers to make church donations using their Visa or bank cards. Well, that takes me back. Time was I had a job at that little supermarket up on Broadway, um, whatever it's called. I don't even know if it's there anymore. I think it's been replaced by a Starbucks. But for many years it was a family-owned supermarket at which I worked as a temporary contract employee on behalf of a temporary agency, urging people to sign a petition to allow an ATM machine in the supermarket itself. Back in the days when ATM machines were not the ubiquitous phenomena that we are all now all so familiar with, but rather were something of a novelty. And there was a concern always in Cambridge with parking. Well, will people just be coming into the market just to use the ATM machine and clog up the parking spots that the residents view as their right to occupy? But as it turns out, of course they got the ATM machine, but it was all moot because they're not there anymore anyway. For $350, Fidelity Information Recovery will send a decoy to hit on your significant other to test his or her ability to resist sexual temptation. Isn't that nice? I thought the going rate was only $100. I guess you could hire an amateur to do it, but these boys, they require, they supply documentation, and it's all very official, and they have uniforms, and they have a payroll, and their employees get benefits, so, $350. Why does spending on political campaigns keep going up and up while voter turnout keeps going down and down? A very good question. No advertiser in his right mind would continue pouring money into an advertising campaign that resulted in fewer and fewer sales, unless, of course, they were advertising on network television, in which case that's the nature of the beast. Network television share has been going down and down and down against cable and against people just turning their televisions off because there's nothing on, nothing ever on. Let's see if there's something good on. Why bother? There's never anything good on. Well, and that's why we have TV Guide, because it gets thicker and thicker, and there's less and less programming, until finally we'll have an infinitude of channels and absolutely nothing whatsoever worth watching. Unless, of course, you happen to be interested in, home building or cooking or scandal or whatnot. Now, these news programs, these pseudo-entertainment news programs, they all revolve around the foibles of celebrities who, if the truth be known, are just the same as you and me, except they just happen to be highly socialized to a degree that they are able to work their will upon those who are susceptible to people who are highly socialized. Of course, since the wrong hero is not socialized whatsoever, he is totally unsusceptible to the appeal of celebrity charm and charisma. Now, politicians, on the other hand, yes, I must admit I was somewhat in awe of Governor Cuomo at one time, at least. So much so that I didn't even want to shake his hand for fear that he had shaken too many hands already and would make his hands sore. And besides, such a bogus thing to do is come up and shake hands with some politician that you've never met. So just so you can say, I shook the hand of Governor Cuomo way back when. Who's Governor Cuomo, Daddy? Oh, he's this guy that almost ran for president 3 times. Well, he's the existential candidate. I think I'll run. Nah, why bother? Sort of like Adlai Stevenson, who didn't even bother to get nominated. Bill Clinton's pal, Eli Siegel, is reported to be hustling CEOs to pledge to hire welfare moms. In the process of this laudable endeavor, he keeps saying, according to our source, the man wants. The man wants. Hey, that's a good title, too. Sorry to keep pausing like this, but I also figure, you can only stand but so much of this, like, rapid-fire documentation without beginning to tune out somewhat. it's a constant struggle to hold your interest while at the same time um, enlightening you to the degree to which I'm capable. A career in talk radio is a new alternative to a lifetime of disgrace. Sure enough, ask Frank Rizzo, ask Buddy Cianci of Providence, ask H. Ross Perot, ask Ralph Nader, ask former Texas Representative Jim Hightower, ask any of a number of people. Rush Limbaugh will tell you, Howard Stern will tell you, Don Imus will tell you. A career in talk radio is a new alternative to a lifetime of disgrace. Well, many good books go unread because they say the right things at the wrong time, according to Charles William Means. And I think the same can be said of politicians. All of those jokers who were agitating for the 8-hour workday back in 1897, boy, is the last laugh ever on us. Now we've got the 8-hour workday, and it's not enough. All those people who wanted to nationalize the railroad services, well, you know, we got that back in 1970. Everybody's pissing and moaning now and saying we ought to privatize it again because it's inefficient, ineffective. And the thing is, reforms of this nature are never instituted until it's almost too late for them to really have the kind of impact they would have had they been enacted when they were initially being agitated for. I'm sorry that extended clause went on and was ended with a preposition. And I'm sorry that I just used the passive tense instead of the active tense by saying, I'm sorry I ended that clause with a preposition. It was too long anyway. I'm learning. Direct speech. That's the ticket. It has to be simple, yet not complex, as my supervisor put it at work yesterday. Danny Finkelstein, 33, the head of policy research, and David Willits, 41, a strategist so cerebral that he is known in British political circles as two brains. This is, of course, the post-mortem of the Tony Blair election. Newsweek seems to be inordinately concerned with this. Tony Blair is Clinton without the baggage. He even has a group of admirers called MOBs, Mates of Blair. Colin Powell is a closet bleeding heart, according to Conventional Wisdom Watch. Well, everyone here knows that running against the Kennedys is like trying to empty Boston Harbor with a pail. Most people either love them or hate them. There isn't much of a swing vote for opponents to count on. Backrack advised one challenger, your friends will tell you he's too dumb and he's too young, and then he's going to clean your clock. Wow. Speaking of, just to sidetrack a little bit, there was an ABC special about U2. It was so roundly ignored, it was the lowest rated show ever. Now what exactly would that be? The lowest rated show ever. Nobody was watching. Nobody even bothered to tape it, so it was erased and we'll never see it ever. Will it ever be shown again? Under what circumstances? When U2 dies, maybe? Will they ever die? Haven't they been around for like 20 years or something? Well, not quite that long. At least 15 years. Let's see. If you walk away, I will follow. 1981. Okay. Funny how foolish we were to be so susceptible to that. I mean, it's just I Will Follow Him by Little Peggy March, right? But jazzed up with some frippertronics. You know, I love him, and when he'll go, I'll follow. If you walk away, I will follow. If you walk, I will follow. Anyway, ominously, let's get back to my favorite topic in dysphoria, which of course is the opposite of euphoria. And so it's very appropriate that Dysphoria, the show, 17 of a 24-part series on politics, should at least concern itself in a modest fashion with drugs, ominously. The war on drugs is being fought with the aid of an ever-expanding number of violations of the rule of law. Civil forfeiture of assets, use of the military and domestic law enforcement, hey, that's right, illegal search and seizure, illicit evidence and perjured testimony, and failure to provide for speedy and fair jury trials. Geez, how many of the Bill of Rights are being violated in our war of drugs? It's called the drugs exception to the Bill of Rights, and this comes from a very interesting periodical that only recently began publication. It's called the Independent Review, and I think issue number 1 came out in, was it fall of '96? I mean, maybe that was issue 2 or 3. Anyway, it's a quarterly, very, very highly recommended. By the Wrong Hero. Although I don't get to read it every time it comes out, I do, excuse me, at the very least look through it. Another interesting journal is Extra, which I'll be citing from at length. But let's see. Civil forfeiture of assets. I'm not sure which amendment to the Constitution that is. I think that's actually in the Constitution. Use of the military and domestic law enforcement. Well, that was mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Illegal search and seizure. Yeah, that's in the Bill of Rights. Illicit evidence and perjured testimony. You will have the right to confront your accuser in court of law. And failure to provide a fair and speedy jury trial. Well, yeah, the court system's so clogged up with these inconsequential drug cases, it's no wonder that they can't recruit jury members fast enough. As a matter of fact, because jury duty is compulsory, and yet because so many people manage to wiggle out of it through one pretext or another, of course the jury system's going to be backed up. And of course jurors have to be totally ignorant, and as ignorant as the American populace is fabled to be. It's difficult to find jurors who are ignorant enough to serve on a jury as our present law is being interpreted. Rasmussen and Benson show that the escalation of enforcement increases property crime, violent crime, and corruption, and does not reduce drug abuse. It may increase it. Their logic is impeccable. As the police focus on drugs, protection of property is diluted. Police sweeps of drug markets disperse dealers into surrounding areas, causing new rounds of turf battles and violent crime, while greater enforcement results in higher prices, higher profits, and greater opportunities for bribery of police. Police and judicial bureaucracies benefit from the drug war in confiscations. And of course, although they don't say as much, the prison industrial complex, as we privatize our prisons, the profit incentive begins to arise. And so, of course, the people who are in charge of the private prisons and who own stock in them, stock which incidentally is a very good investment, are encouraged to donate money to political candidates who resolve to put more people in prison, thus providing more business for the prison industrial complex. And so it's a vicious cycle of sorts. And you know, everything, it seems as though every merchandising ploy is basically one that would be admirably suited to selling addictive drugs. That is to say, every television commercial presents the product that is to be sold as though it were not only a luxury but a necessity to which one has become addicted and which one cannot do without. When criminal justice is provided by the state and is accessible to everyone, it is overused by the public and politicians. Worse, it is misused, inefficient, and unaccountable. In the limit, its value to society evaporates, and society does without criminal justice, an outcome fraught with peril for everyone. Thus, the drug war exemplifies a greater looming problem that must be resolved if we are to have a free and stable society. Don't make me laugh. A free and stable society, you say. Well, alright. Sad news. Workers who are being shed Oh, by the way, those citations were from the Independent Review and from fall of '96, and that article was written by Mark Thornton. And now from Extra from May-June of '97, cited by Mark Crispin Miller. Workers who are being shed might not be so enthusiastic about what USA Today calls America's razor-edged free market. Well, look at currently we have the UPS strike. And of course, that's a result of America's razor-edged free market. Channel 1 messages. Remember Channel 1? Still around. Being shut into schools. Watch, don't think. Let us fix it. Eat now. You're ugly. Just say yes. Addiction 101. The news must, on the one hand, keep us sitting there and watching, as an MC has to keep his audience mildly entertained between the acts. But it must also constantly efface itself, must keep itself from saying anything too powerful or even interesting, must never cut too deep or raise any really troubling questions, because it never can be permitted to detract in any way from the commercials. Its aim must be, in short, to keep our eyes wide open and our minds asleep, so that the commercial will look good to us, sound true to us, and thereby work on us. Of all the promises that advertising makes us, this promise to a certain rude empowerment, personal, immediate, and absolute, is now the one that comes at us most often. The promise used most often in those ads that are directed at the weakest of us, the poor, women generally, and kids. Over and over, the product flashes into view as something you ought to pay for, not because you might enjoy it, but because it promises to make you indestructible, as hard as steel, a Superman or Superwoman. Such fantasies appear to answer, and of course also exacerbate, the ferocious longing of their captive audience for freedom, independence, confidence, and strength, which adolescents generally lack, and know they lack. The point comes at them repeatedly, as all successful propaganda must. That point is, buy the power. The myth of the advertiser's total competence promotes stupidity by suggesting that there is no worthwhile knowledge other than the knowledge of elite technicians, who are, of course, all working for major corporate advertisers. Devices such as the fake authority, the vaguely scientific mumbo-jumbo that advertising has been using on the public since the 19th century. The advertisers do want us to feel as bad as it takes to get us buying what we're told we need so as to come across like winners. The only moral difference between drug dealers and the corporate advertisers is one of scale. The advertisers are immeasurably richer and have done much more harm. Both work full-time to lure the children into absolute permanent dependency, and both do so exclusively for profit's sake. Both, therefore, would prefer that their young targets be ill-educated on the subject of addiction. Thus, the advertisers help put out that cautionary propaganda which demonizes the individual black pusher, and thereby helps obscure the advertiser's own addictive mission. While continuously urging your immediate self-indulgence, the ads also promote the addict's attitude through the usual psychotic overestimation of the modest items that they sell. It isn't just a candy bar, it isn't just a pair of pants, it's a delirium, an orgasm, an apocalypse of fun. I gotta pause here. That is such a great title. An apocalypse of fun. Take a break. It isn't just a candy bar, it isn't just a pair of pants, it's a delirium, an orgasm, an apocalypse of fun. And as William Blake said, fun, too much fun is of all things the most loathsome. The ad makers use every visual and oral means available to make the everyday experience of tasting this and wearing that seem like a sort of psychedelic wet dream in which you feel like you've never felt before. ecstatic and all-powerful. Intoxicating imagery, inappropriately linked with mere consumer goods, establish an impossible standard of enjoyment. Propaganda makes it even harder to recall what actual pleasures should be like. Ain't that the truth? Well, I don't know. Oh, true, of course. The products are routinely advertised as working just like drugs. Kids bombarded by these ads would come to feel numb enough to need those still more dangerous stimulants Channel 1 so piously deplores. Well, back to personalities. Pete Wilson wants Californians as young as 14 to be executed. Cruz Bustamante, Democratic Speaker of the State Assembly of California, said he'd allow executions at 13, says David Futrell, cited in These Times of March 12th. Congress is about to take away the Social Security benefits of people with felony convictions. That's great. So we're going to have geriatric ex-burglars don't have any income who are forced to resume their life of crime just to survive at a sustenance level since they're not skilled in anything else but burglary. A spine is a terrible thing to waste, says Robert Corn Revere in the American Journalism Review of May 1997. Well, there's no interest in politics right now because there's no conflict. Democracy demands conflict, says James Carville, cited by Joe Klein in The New Yorker, of course. See, the New Yorker is such a prestige journal that spokespeople even turn up on programs like, oh, I don't know, Geraldo or one of those news expose programs who are currently all nauseating us with the aftermath of the tragic little beauty, Joan Benet Ramsey. She's never described except with the Homeric epithet, tragic beauty queen. You know, and the thing is, these kitty pageants, I mean, come on, anybody can start a kitty pageant. They don't signify anything. It's like a group of 20 people decides they're going to have a pageant with their 20 kids and one of them wins. Big deal. So what? Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean she's a beauty queen. It means she's the least ugly of the kids that the doting parents have corralled. They had two kids on this program last night, August 4th. One was the Long Island Princess, and the other was the Long Island Prince. Of course, our prince had packed on about 20 pounds under the harsh lights. And, you gotta wonder about a good American boy wanting to be called the Prince of Long Island. The distance between being eager to please and being unwilling to offend may seem small, but it's not insignificant. One is active and optimistic, the other is reactive and dark. It is, however, the path that Bill Clinton has taken since he arrived in Washington. He was always the complete political animal, obsessed with polling, but the aggressive need to be loved has been transformed into a more defensive impulse. After the electoral debacle of 1994, Dick Morris taught Clinton how to lead defensively, and that is where Clinton remains today, still testing every move against the polls. Old friends once harbored grand hopes for his presidency, but now have moved on. How sad. A waste is a terrible thing to mind, so eat all you want, because we want the president to be happy. In Symptoms of Survival, and I'm quoting now from Reason of June 1997, which came out, strangely enough, on March 10th. Reason comes out about a good 3 weeks before the cover date, for some reason. Hey, because it's reason. It's not treason, it's reason. In Symptoms of Survival, Jane Jacobs sets out to examine the moral codes that govern work. She finds two syndromes, two mutually exclusive collections of connected traits, self-organized systems that have evolved over the long span of human history. They derive from taking, hunting, gathering, and trading, the guardian syndrome and the commercial syndrome. The commercial syndrome is bourgeois morality. Shun force, come to voluntary agreements, compete, respect contracts, use initiative and enterprise, be open to inventiveness and novelty, be efficient, promote comfort and convenience, dissent for the sake of the task, invest for productive purposes, be thrifty, be optimistic. The guardian syndrome contains aristocratic and martial virtues. Shun trading, exert prowess, be obedient and disciplined, adhere to tradition, respect hierarchy, be loyal, take vengeance, deceive for the sake of the task, make rich use of leisure, be ostentatious, dispense largesse, be exclusive, show fortitude, be fatalistic, treasure honor. Guardian precepts strengthen the individual against fear and weakness, and against the temptation to misuse prowess or sell out allies. They are suited to defense against predators as well as attacks against enemies. For commerce to flourish, the territory within which it operates requires protection, and the rules that forbid theft and fraud need reinforcement. Trying to mix the two syndromes, or apply them to inappropriate activities, produces institutional, social, and moral breakdown, says Virginia I. Postrel. Sounds good to me. So in other words, they're saying, don't forget, hire the vet. And yet, you're a commercial enterprise, and yet you're hiring somebody with a guardian mentality to sell your products or to work in your firm. And of course, his training is inimical to your bourgeois enterprise. So I don't know why the Army keeps insisting that it'll help you find a better job on the outside. Maybe if you get a job as a corporate raider or an independent entrepreneur who is out to destroy the other markets, then perhaps. Inject a bit of commercial morality into guardian tasks or vice versa, and you produce monstrous hybrids. Some are truly horrific, such as the Nazis turning commercial-style efficiency toward genocide. Others are corrupting in more banal ways, such as defense contractors' insensitivity to costs or forfeiture used to fund police departments. The Clinton administration is almost unsurpassed in its ability to apply the inappropriate syndrome to the issue at hand. As Labor Secretary, Robert Reich complained that corporations didn't show guardian-type loyalty, while the administration demands commercial-style behavior from the military. Firing the travel office staff, contract employees performing a commercial function, to ensure loyalty and wreak vengeance was a typical mixing of modes. So is asking the CIA to do industrial espionage. Fundraising for political candidates has inherent problems, especially in a legal regime that prohibits large donations from idealistically driven people, fundraising easily becomes the use of force or the threat to get trades. It is part protection racket, part bribery, a monstrous hybrid. The only defense against such corruption is rigid, unswerving, ideological commitment. Policy views so certain that they cannot be swayed by money, and so clear and predictable that they do not invite people to try. Whether one can be so stubborn and get elected to political office is not clear. Well, as Eloise Anderson said, all you have to do is sit down because what goes around will come around. You know, it's really too bad. We have all these really bright social workers, and yet they can't get any advancement in their careers because they haven't got a master of social work. And getting a master's in social work is a much more painful and inconvenient process than it really needs to be. I mean, a lot of that stuff can be done through distance learning. It doesn't depend upon you being in a certain place at a certain time. And a lot of this stuff can be done at a slower pace than is traditionally regarded as desirable in a graduate program. Social work is an ongoing learning process, and social workers are stressed out enough without having to also deal with the exigencies of graduate school. They should be permitted to take intensive seminars over the course of, say, a week in lieu of, say, vacation time or something like that. I don't know. All at once, viruses have replaced the atom bomb as the object of the apocalyptic vision. A killer virus can be killed by a liberal application of bleach. So if we live in a bleach world, yeah, dioxin will kill it. Hey, there we go. We finally found a good use for dioxin. So anyway, it used to be atom bombs, now it's viruses. Cool. It was a kind of hoggish appetite for romance that sent my generation, spoiled and petulant, on a journey to Oz, a journey from which some of us are only now straggling back in intellectual tatters, says P.J. O'Rourke about the generation of the 60s, in a special issue of the American Enterprise from May-June of '97. Coddled goofs, Ben Stein calls them. The students on this campus are confused. They're frightened. They don't know what to think. You are older than we are and more experienced. We want guidance from you, moral leadership. On behalf of my fellow students, I beg you to give it to us, said Kurt Schmoke at Yale. Of course, Kurt Schmokey, he's the mayor of Baltimore. He's called for the legalization of drugs. Good man, good man. Subvert the state. Yeah, stop the madness. The greatest crimes do not arise from a want of feeling for others, but from an over-sensibility for ourselves and an overindulgence to our own desires, said Edmund Burke. To accept responsibility is to follow the line of maximum effort, whereas man's secret desire is to follow the line of lesser resistance. The endless twisting and dodging that results is surely the least reputable aspect of human nature. All this is true. No other journal so eloquently combines the comforts of privilege with the glamour of dissent, said Stan Evans on the New Yorker, circa 1961. Silk and velvet ranks, the radical movement drew most of its activists from. The Clintons have offered perfect updates on the 60s tactic of demanding economic justice while publishing manuals of how to live cheaply by stealing. The sanctimony, confusion, and devious calculation of 60s radicals routinized. The 60s are a cautionary fable about what happens to any society that throws away tradition when it has nothing better to replace it with. Incidentally, 10% of Americans think Joan of Arc was married to Noah. Noah of Arc. There's nothing we did in the 60s that Lord Byron wouldn't have done if he had a good stereo, says P.J. O'Rourke. A libertarian is a conservative with an acknowledged vice, say, a teenage girlfriend, says P.J. O'Rourke. And he makes a point which I've made many times, independently of him. Only the state is allowed to kill you. If we want to limit freedoms, the burden of proof should be on the limiter. The prejudice always has to be in favor of freedoms. Does that mean liberty? Does that mean anarchy? Civilization is always hung by a thread. The great bulk of human history is not the history of civilization. It is the history of barbarism, says the surprisingly deep P.J. O'Rourke. Of course, you know, he picks everybody else's brains. Civil rights was the good part. The start of family breakdown was the worst thing that happened to America since I can remember. At the Portsmouth Abbey School, during the Cambodian incursion, students wore black armbands on their blazers. What exactly are you protesting? Said the history teacher, probably James Garman, and the protest fizzled. William Bennett had something posted on his door which read, "Go back to Moscow, you big radial," when he was teaching at the University of Southern Michigan. Oh man. In the last 3 decades, many cultural break lines have been cut, says William J. Bennett. Individuals affiliated with a religion have lower rates of drug use. Well, as Michael Green, the president of the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, said, "It's their job to rebel, and we sell that rebellion. Rock music is an industry that runs fast, it runs hard. It sells the manifestation of the rebellion that kids need to exercise, or perhaps exorcise." Well, anyway, in the Nation of March 26th, Jim Hamlin of the Texas Constitutional Militia wants to know, why are they so afraid of a few 100,000 people with assault rifles? Good question. Economic apartheid keeps the bottom half of the society well hidden from the top half. Well, Tony Blair, unlike Mitterrand across the channel, he has not come to power under false colors or made promises he can't possibly keep. Shrewdly, he got his betrayals in early. It was massive rearmament and not the New Deal that pulled America out of the slump. You can indeed hold FDR responsible for the cumbrous American imperium of the empire, the national security state, and the military-industrial complex, the foundations of big government. But let's not slight Harry Truman's contribution to all this. At least he had some of the right enemies, even if he didn't do enough to earn them. Again, Christopher Hitchens on FDR. Much of America's human rights crusade is meant for home consumption and not foreign edification, says Bernard Fong of Hong Kong. Agreeing to be nice does not solve America's problems. Well, I guess you can call me the 22nd banana. Now there was something I wanted to write down because I was thinking of it as a possible. Oh yes, betrayals. I think I will call one of my presentations, betrayal. In fact, I will use the famous phrase of my friend Mark Biginus, how much they betray. That can be one of my latest yes, they betray. It's what they are best at. Who are they, you may want to know. Well, I'm going to take several hours to think about that issue. And get back to you on that one as we continue with dysphoria. I do want you to know that there were a great many titles that I could have referred to this presentation under. For example, Country and Western Civilization, Loss, Hardcore Respectability, The Crazy Gang, Anti-Oz, Lost, Rough Boys, It's a Terrible Death, Living in My Own Shadow, Sex and Money, A Burned Out Intellect, Losers, Perpetually Epitomizing Deviancy, No Fortunate Son, One of the More Evil People on This Planet, Persona Non Grata, God's Paper, The Slave World, An Animal Without Hope, Perverse Mythology, Metastasizing Technology, Bad Poetry Magazine, Psychically Challenged, A Certain Irony, LSD Diary, The Men, Inhuman Events, The Timid Colossus, God's Day, The World's Voice, The Mousetrap, Drugged Individualism, Mere Activist, C-21, More Anarchy, A Minor Motion Picture, Baloney with Attitude, Totally Wrong, or Polka. Polka, everybody loves polka, but I'm going to stick with dysphoria. Of course, I already had a presentation a couple of years ago called Dyslandia, but this is in no way a sequel, I fear. Anyway, I must go. I wish I could stay, but I got too much to do. Not least of which is go pick up the laundry. So I'll put my marker on this. Well, happily, I've come back and there's more. So sit tight while we give you part 2 of dysphoria. Gee, the FBI may have doctored forensic evidence in the Jeffrey McDonald fatal vision case, according to Ruth Shallett of the New Republic. Michael Kelly refers to the all-draft volunteer force. A charming conceit. In the New Statesman and Society of 9 May, Sean French says, I remember Blair's confidence in 1992. Then it seemed cocky, out of place. It was the air that madmen and the phenomenally successful share. The people who turn out to be transcendentally successful do things the opposite way round from the rest of us. They adopt the attitude of success and then wait for reality to catch up, or at least so they wish. Richard Wagner used his genius as a pretext for exploiting everybody around him, but the capacity for exploitation was fully developed before the musical genius showed itself. The snag is that it's not just geniuses who make irrationally optimistic assumptions about the way things will turn out. That's the way mad people behave. If you read Van Gogh's letters, you glimpse how narrow the gap is between the two alternatives. What if the paintings had been no good? As Dali put it, the only difference between me and a madman is that I am not mad. Okay. So far, so good. Moving right along in our Dysphoria presentation, a litany of disgusting dishes: 5B salad, Yule dog, baked elastic, ice cream hornet, beans on toast, mint chalk chick, duck a la orang, fetid cheese salad, crazed beef, mushy bees, crispy poodles, larva bread, shepherd's eye. So keep those in mind. Of course, Howie Carr has quite an entertaining time in the Boston Herald of May 16th, victimizing people, as is his specialty. Stinky Ripple Cripple, Uncle Sap, the Wino American Community, Bumologist, says Howard Carr, or as he prefers to be known, Howie Carr. He uses the money he receives in donations to purchase the basic necessities of life. Does that include fortified wine? Asks the sardonic Howie Carr. I guess inquiring minds want to know. Well, what's the difference between Hungary and North Korea? One of them really is hungry. There's a winning jape for you. And now, some more slanders about our Vice President by Tucker Carlson, writing in the Weekly Standard of May 19th. The only thing unexpected about Al Gore is that his true nature has escaped detection for so long. Gore has always been shifty and disingenuous. If there is anyone capable of standing before a group of competent adults and smiling as he tells utterly implausible tales, all while maintaining an air of moral indignation, it is Al Gore. He was born to it. It's never easy for a freshman member of Congress to get media attention, but Gore soon devised a winning strategy. Become the self-appointed spokesman for issues few others understand or care about, master their details, and use them as a platform for providing inflammatory but memorable quotes to the press. Not everyone appreciated Gore's overheated and theatrical tactics. Gore accused Gulf Oil of behaving like a corporate Patty Hearst. From a public relations standpoint, Gore's petty nativism was easy to understand, even respect. Gore sought publicity with relentless intensity. The grandstanding on issues continued. Gore's calculated histrionics may have kept his name in the paper, but they irritated his colleagues. That know-it-all takes some getting used to, complained Senator Ernest Hollings. If you look at his career, particularly in the House, it was a career based more So, on almost any other I know, on non-controversial issues like liver transplants. 1988 Gephardt campaign manager Bill Carrick went on to describe Gore and his advisors as the phoniest two-bit bastards that ever came down the pike. By last year, had been forgiven and was running the Clinton re-election effort in California. But Gore remained unpopular with many of his former colleagues in Congress, even politically sympathetic Democrats. Although a hawk, Gore was never entirely able to shed the rhetoric of encounter group foreign policy that so discredited the Democrats of the 1980s. Somehow, even for reporters who cover him, it's hard to imagine Al Gore as being as nasty as he often is. For example, the Willie Horton issue. His rhetoric is like Bob Dornan's, but nobody notices, says one reporter who has. Still, Gore remains an old person's idea of a young person, according to Michael Kinsley. Gore cultivates this image, aware that there is advantage in being considered too bland to be calculating, and that stiffness is easily mistaken for principle, refusing to appear in anything but a blue suit, light blue shirt, and red tie. Well now, here's an interesting matchup for the campaign 2000. Gore and Gephardt, now bear with me, versus Weld and Lugar. That would be quite a race, actually. I think it would be very close. I might be tempted to vote for Weld Lugar in any event. Remember, if it comes true, you heard it here first, a good 3 years before the fact. Pro-life, anti-gay rights positions were central to Gore's well-tended image of a raging moderate. Today, the evidence of a ecological crystal knock is as clear as the sound of glass shattering in Berlin, said Al Gore in Earth in the Balance, page 177. Al Gore jumps around like a little kid at a new technological insight or advance, says Ann Peretz. A lot of this people are not interested in. They think it's a little weird, says Marty Peretz. That's funny because you could say the same thing about Newt Gingrich. The worst thing about Gore was how he read that heavy stuff right off the teleprompter. The worst part was that the account of his son's accident had been lifted almost word for word from the intro of Earth in the Balance. Well, you shouldn't be over 40 and have bangs, says North Carolina investor Jay Myers on Bill Gates. The Russians are losing control over their nuclear arsenal, we are assured. Hypertext was invented in 1945 or at least outlined in 1945 by Vannevar Bush. It was envisioned as an appendage to the brain, the first node in this global brain. Ted Nelson invented a global hypertext system in the 1960s. In Washington, facts sometimes tend to mislead. All the facts sometimes tend to mislead absolutely, said Ward Just, cited by R.Z. Shepard. This was in Time magazine of May 19th. Government's the opiate of the patrician masses, said Ward just in Echo House. The CIA, too many secrets, not enough mystery. Ibid. The secret hidden message is that all people are the same, says David Blaine, cited by D. Handelman. Somewhere in the dim recesses of this journalistic soul lies the horrible suspicion. This is really a pretty shallow and maybe unseemly way for a grown-up to make a living. As a consequence, American journalism makes extravagant gestures of self-justification, says Andrew Ferguson. Journalism schools take 4 years to teach a skill, writing a news story, that most people, even undergraduates, can learn in a week. This perpetuates the fiction that journalism is a profession like lawyering rather than a trade like plumbing. Perhaps the elaborate infrastructure journalism has constructed around itself is evidence not of self-doubt, but of self-aggrandizement. The two often work together after all. But try to imagine any other trade or profession going to such lengths to justify itself to customers. Well, librarianship. Oh man. Here's a pretty heavy-duty quote. Avraham Berg, cited in Newsweek of May 19th. I have a feeling there wasn't a bar of gold going around Europe then which didn't have at least one golden tooth torn from the mouth of a Jewish victim. Just when I looked to get a gold tooth, and now the price of gold is at its lowest in years. Oh well. Live and learn. Well, guess who gave a fundraiser for Senator Ernest Fritz Hollings, moderate Southern Democrat? None other than Rupert Murdoch. And it's cited in the U.S. News and World Report of May 19th. But, you might say to yourself, who wants yesterday's papers? So let's plow ahead and talk about some of the things which make this country's political system a type of phenomena which can be described in terms of dysphoria. According to the Spectator of May 10th, on pollsters in Great Britain, politely but firmly, those whom preliminary canvassers had identified as doubtful were exercising their right to hoard their indecision. According to Petronella Wyatt, I admire bad losers. I'm a bad loser myself. Anyone who murmurs self-deprecatingly, no hard feelings, or worse, the best man won, is clearly a liar. Since when did your opponent think you were the best man, or vice versa? Very few people are scrupulously honest in secret as they are in public, and many are influenced by public opinion, but very few by conscience, said Pliny some 2,000 years ago, quoted by Peter Jones, professor of classics at Oxford. Well, here are some dubious proverbs that would stand well as proverbs of dysphoria. An ounce of emotion is worth a ton of fact. No one ever destroyed a man by sneering. Always look forward, never back. Everybody is interested in sex and money. When in search of a subject, turn to the royal family. It is not libelous to ask a question. No first-class journalist ever had a beard. This was a eulogy on Alan Watkins. who's also known for saying, "Only poops drink rosé." As a man, Alan Watkins was both uncannily perceptive and uncomfortably moralistic, according to this self-same eulogy. He had three categories of assessment: good, very good, and brilliant. Good articles seldom went into the paper. Brilliant ones might even be excluded. Well, what do you know? I was supposed to have written this letter to my friend a good 3 months ago, and now I see that I've uncovered some of the things I was going to send along to him. A Churchill courtier, anxious to avoid political damage, reported to Winston that a Conservative MP had been arrested in a London park at midnight for indecent exposure. With that wicked twinkle in his eye, the Prime Minister observed, "At midnight, you say, in this weather? It makes you proud to be British." Well, there was a long article about Scientology in George magazine of June 1997, which I will read choice extracts from. Scientology is no more a religion than the Chicago Bulls are. Getting him to listen was like pulling teeth from a running donkey. Presumably talking about the founder of Scientology. Washington, D.C., most decrepit capital in the world. Potholes filled with mattresses, towed cars stripped or stolen from the city impound lot, crooks recruited for the police force, cryptosporidium and coliform in the drinking water. So that's why all these Washington bigwigs drink bottled water. Best states for men. Standard of living, best, New Hampshire. Worst, Mississippi. Best states for men. Murder, Nebraska. Worst, Louisiana. Most college degrees per capita. Best, Connecticut. Worst, West Virginia. Best wages, Nebraska. Worst wages, Louisiana. The best states for men are New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Delaware, Nebraska, Colorado, and Utah. The worst are West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Geez, I guess all of these are kind of south and western states. Well, according to Michael Lewis, losers display a valuable candor. The real personalities of winners elude the voters' view, but the bottom-rung candidates let loose with lively and outrageous rhetoric. According to Joe Queenan, golf, which so many politicians are so very fond of, is a sport for oddly clad Presbyterians, designed for fat, out-of-shape, horrible yuppies. He also says in a sidebar that Hootie and the Blowfish are the Gen X Chicago. And then says, golf remains now, as always, a sport geared toward fat men in plaid pants who think that Fortune magazine is racy. Well, and we are reliably informed, according to the same source, which is George magazine, that the nation is now outselling the New Republic. Jack Kemp may very well run for president in the year 2000. However, It has been said that for a quarterback, Jack Kemp is amazingly indecisive. Mr. President, I really think you ought to consider giving just one answer to each question instead of 6, said Erskine Bowles to Bill Clinton. He always assumed that when two people compete for the same position, the loser doesn't get to hang around, says Claire Shipman on Bill Clinton. Don't judge me by what I do, but by how my children treat other people, says Skipper Bowles. Erskine Bowles is the high priest of Clinton's religion, Dick Morris says. His job is to consult the oracle and then go forth to spread the gospel. I never study to get B's, says Erskine Bowles. The great Democratic God didn't pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles. Didst hurl him upon a war horse. The great Democratic God didst pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles. Didst hurl him upon a war horse. Didst thunder him higher than a throne, says Melville in Moby Dick. Whereas Calhoun was described as the cast iron man who looks as if he never had been born and never could be extinguished. This is an article about the top 10 political men of all times, presumably Americans. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a litany of 10 presidents, mind you. That would be boring. According to this article, the top 10 political men of all time are Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Burr, Jackson, Calhoun, Lincoln, Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, and FDR. Presumably this is taken in chronological order. Woodrow Wilson adored vaudeville, detested Teddy Roosevelt, and vice versa. Men in great place are thrice servants, servants of the sovereign or state, servants of fame, and servants of business, as Francis Bacon said. Armageddon, to me, is killing off your old ways. It's forsaking the idea of God and believing in yourself. And to Christianity, that's the end of the world, says Marilyn Manson, cited by Neil Strauss. In America, the idea of politics is just blatantly unimportant. It's always been art that's changed the way people think. And that's why art has always been suppressed, says Marilyn Manson. Giuliani, the Tao of the short fuse, the Zen of pure irritability, frequent tantrums, getting annoyed at little things is virtually a civic duty, sweating the small stuff, tough on crime, tough on everyone, short fuse explosions, Rudy's jihads. If you lose your sense of impatience about the things that are going wrong, then things start to go very wrong. All this according to Ron Rosenbaum. As J.C. Watts says about Jesse Jackson, a race-hustling poverty pimp. Well, while living this public life, Giuliani's shyness is occasionally misunderstood as arrogance. He is always engaged in some sort of problem solving and does not enjoy small talk, which is not conducive to great thoughts. But the cerebral heavy lifting is enlivened by a sense of humor and a sweetness of character. According to Judge Souter, the judiciary is not a political institution. The whole point of it is not to be one, nor is it part of the entertainment industry in the United States. Unsure of what they stand for, people increasingly rely on money as a criterion of value, says George Soros, one of the richest men in the world, cited by Michael Lewis. John Huang, Fu Manchu with security clearance, says David Henry Huang, no relation. I don't appreciate I don't associate with goody two-shoes types when it comes to religion. I can't deal with people who are that good. Around Washington, D.C., if you have any passion and you like to have fun, people kind of wonder about you, says John Kasich, cited by J.P. Barlow. In politics, as in life, you are partly defined by your friends and enemies, says Tony Blankley. Well, I don't know how much longer I can continue with this litany of quotes from George Magazine without going stark, staring bonkers. So maybe I'll just interrupt it for a little while. Boston is a very nice place to live, isn't it? Okay. Well, as Robert Schuller says, turn your scars into stars. Whatever the hell that means. What dope has this guy been smoking? For the pundits and politicos scrambling to be booked on Imus's show, there are a few unwritten rules. Don't be a phony. Be direct and tell the truth. Don't be a weasel. And don't try to ingratiate yourself with the host, because once the show starts, it's all about being funny, and personal loyalties are expendable, says John F. Kennedy, Jr. Imus's life is lived on the air, not off it, and those who forget that do so at their peril. According to Imus, a dream guest is a guest who comes on Tuesday and then has to spend the rest of the week apologizing or trying to explain what they said. Again, quoting from the great man, I think I'm fair. Nobody gets made more fun of than I do. I get ridiculed by my own people on my own program. Oftentimes, I'm embarrassed about things I've said that are just out of line and stupid. Saying it's just a joke is a cop-out, absolutely. But it's never funny when it's about you. I know because I've been on the other end of it. Maybe John F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to get some good press from Imus. Hence the interview in his prestigious forum. I was talking to Andy Rooney about why Stanley Crouch, P.J. O'Rourke, and Molly Ivins did not make it on 60 Minutes. They're all accomplished columnists, but their essays are meant to be read, not listened to. It's different for the radio, the syntax, the rhythms. That's why I've always felt Saturday Night Live has an impossible task. They have to make it funny and visual, too. I think Bill Clinton has a good, decent heart, and he means well, as opposed to Al Gore, who I really think is one of the more evil people on the planet, says Don Imus. There are certain entertainers who, by popular consensus, have crossed some line and are forevermore persona non grata, such as Andrew Dice Clay and Sinead O'Connor, according to JFK Jr. Imus says, Rush Limbaugh is a moron. Pushing one note, he locked himself into one camp and presented only one view, and I think the re-election of Clinton shut him up. There's just not a lot there. I don't want to be bothered by corporations who give to charity based on some product promotion. If you buy so many hamburgers, we'll give to such and such. Gee, I don't want to be bothered by them either. At Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, in 1961, a best-selling statuette at the campus store featured Colonel Rebel, a caricature of a Confederate gentleman, muttering, "Forget hell." The Old Miss cheer goes, "Hotty toddy, gosh almighty, who the hell are we? Hey, flim flam, bim bam, Ole Miss, by damn." Well, as Fred Thompson said about Trent Lott, he's going to be a hard dog to keep on the porch. Where would our politics be if it weren't for colorful expressions such as that? I think they'd even be more profoundly boring than they already are. Well, it's time we got off the ferry boat. and started getting onto some real pictures. I hope you enjoyed our scenic Boston Harbor tour, and I hope that it helped render palatable the incredibly immense amounts of verbiage that have passed between my lips in the last hour and a half. And I hope, too, that you will stay tuned because our program is far from over. As a matter of fact, it still has another 35 minutes or so to go. Now, that may be good news or bad news according to your inclinations or lack thereof. To me, quite frankly, it's bad news. I mean, I've already talked for a good 30 minutes straight. I mean, it's not easy to do this either. I just hope you appreciate the incredible sacrifices I'm making in terms of my free time in order to bring you this presentation. Now, I said this was to be a 24-part series, but unfortunately we're on part 17 and I'm afraid we're going a little too fast. But I'm going to try my best to stretch it out to 24 or maybe even 25. That way, we'll have had a 50-hour marathon. Maybe 48 hours would suffice so that if you were to run it consecutively, it would take 2 whole days to digest. No man alive could possibly sit through 48 hours of such droning persiflage. Well, I found my watch. I was frantically looking around for it this morning, and as a result, was late for work. And of course, I found it right where I left it. It's always right where you leave it. Did you know that? So whenever you lose something, just remember, it's right where I left it. And that will help you. Well, goodbye to Boston Harbor. We hope to see you again, my fine friend. And now I guess time for the wrong hero to pay you all a visit. Lock the kitties in their rooms because this is not going to be pretty on Dysphoria. Greetings. Wrong hero here. And if you don't like it, tough. Dysphoria. Now here's a prime example of what I've been talking about all along. You know, basically it all started when I was a kid. I grew up on an Indian reservation, and we used to play cowboys and more fucking cowboys. Kids beat me up on the way to school. Pretty depressing when you're 34 years old. Our parents would buy us animal crackers, but they were inner city animal crackers. Rats, mice, pigeons, silverfish. The good humor man was Mike Tyson. I figured I ought to learn how to defend myself. So I boxed in the Golden Gloves, and I very nearly suffocated. One time I went to Mount Washington, and John Quincy Adams had me arrested for sedition. My cellmates were Charlie Manson and Peter, Paul, and Mary. Now, Charlie was okay. We got along all right. You know, we had a little bit of small talk going. Charlie, who does your X? It's smashing. Do you think you could carve one onto my forehead? But Peter, Paul, and Mary were the pits, always yammering about if I had a hammer. Finally, I went over to him and I told him, look, if I had a hammer, there'd be no more folk singers. There, now that you've had your ration of jokes, let me now proceed with the remaining 30 minutes of my presentation. According to Richard Rorty, cited in the New Leader of April 7th, philosophy began as an attempt to escape into a world in which nothing would ever change, Only as philosophers began to take time and history seriously did their hopes for the future of this world gradually replace their desire for knowledge of another world. Hegel and Darwin, idealism and naturalism in conflict, nevertheless reinforced each other. Their combined influence moved philosophy away from the question, what are we, to the question, what might we try to become? Nowadays, we have to agree with Marx that our job is to help make the future different from the past, rather than claiming to know what the two must necessarily have in common. Priests and sages can set their own agendas. Contemporary philosophers must find out what their clients need. Only a society without politics, run by tyrants who prevent social and cultural change from occurring, would no longer require philosophers. Dewey suggested that we see philosophers as springing from a conflict of inherited institutions with incompatible contemporary tendencies. Can Enlightenment values survive the breakdown of the nation-state as a socio-economic unit? The inevitable consequence of economic globalization? Look at Albania. Why, it's the war of all against all. That's what happens when you take a feudal society that was mired in the Middle Ages and suddenly attempt to bring it up to speed. Of course, the very same might be said of Russia, for that matter. Inequalities are taken for granted by the middle class of every industrialized democracy. Inequalities are essential for the viability of democratic government. Or is that the middle class that's essential for the viability of democratic government? You decide. When transcendent justice conflicts with loyalty, loyalty and empirical value usually wins, says the brilliant Richard Rorty. Marx woke up to the possible obsolescence of the vocabularies in which we conduct our moral and political deliberations and frame our utopian visions, something that still needs to be done. According to Waltzer's view, that is, Michael Waltzer, author of Spheres of Justice and Thick and Thin, on Waltzer's view, moralities are local, parochial, thick. He argues that universalism is not intrinsic to morality, as Kantians insist. Waltzer effectively restates Hegel's principal objection to Kantian ethics, that the universal duty to produce equal dignity for all men leaves no place for the particular allegiances that determine our moral identity, our allegiance to our culture, our country, our historical tradition. Ideologies, according to John Patrick Diggins, die of their own lies. In The Hairy Ape, Eugene O'Neill saw the promise of socialism as tragic, since it is based on impossible premises. Among them, that it is the mission of the working class to redeem the wild from the bottom up, and to do so by negating the power of the ruling class as the workers achieve freedom and recognition, says Stefan Kampfer in the highly regarded New Leader, which unfortunately only has a circulation of about 20,000, which makes it a veritable pinprick, and it's seldom that you'll see it on the newsstands. In fact, I'm not sure, but I believe it's available largely by subscription only. Now, that's a thing called sad, if in fact it be so. But I'm doing my best. The risk exists that the wild culture of the World Wide Web will erode standards of accuracy when papers go online. Well, yeah, just like television turned radio more like television, I suppose the World Wide Web could make newspapers more like the World Wide Web. But how can something be more like something else? as Edward Dorn asked in Gunslinger. I paid the editor and reporter to tell me what they thought I should know, says Stephen Brill on newspapers. The exploitation of immigrants is one of the great scandals of our time, says Bill Keller, the foreign editor of the New York Times, cited by Sasha Abramsky in the Columbia Journalism Review of May-June 1997. And it's prescient because a mere 2 months later there was that big scandal with all the deaf Mexicans the hearing impaired Mexicans who were forced to sell 25-cent trinkets on the street. Trinkets, incidentally, purchased here in Rhode Island, 5 for the dollar, on the streets for $1 a piece. And if they didn't make $200 a day, out they go. Sort of like being a cab driver. By the way, if the upper Cape, that is, the upper portion of Cape Cod, seems to be a little more polluted than usual, it's because of the runoff of toxic pollutants from military bases, according to the Cape Cod Times of January 5th, 1997, cited in the Columbia Journalism Review. The New York Daily News had always pricked the pomposity of the mighty, but suddenly in the 1993 to 1996 period, the paper went from tell it to Sweeney to stick it to Sweeney, but no more. Well, what are the places with the highest and lowest retail earnings? Well, San Francisco, Bergen, New Jersey, Anchorage, Alaska, New York City, Oakland, California, Honolulu, Hawaii, Yolo, California, Jersey City, New Haven, Connecticut, and Middlesex, New Jersey have the highest retail earnings, whereas the lowest are Provo, Utah, Lincoln, Nebraska, Pocatello, Idaho, Steubenville, Weirton, West Virginia, Ohio, and Grand Forks, North Dakota, Minnesota. Not places to start a new business. And what are the places with the fastest and slowest job growth? Well, heading the pack of fastest job growth is Las Vegas, followed by Punta Gorda, Florida, Fort Collins, Colorado, where they just had that big flood in, by the way, Naples, Florida, Fayetteville, Arkansas, Dover, Delaware, Provo, Utah, Yolo, California, Clarksville, Tennessee, and Tallahassee, Florida. Whereas the places with the slowest job growth and change of employment are Binghamton, New York, stuck in the middle of nowhere, New Haven, Connecticut, New York City, Bergen, New Jersey, and Newark, New Jersey at the bottom of the list with negative 6.9% job growth, according to American Demographics of May of 1997. And the places with the most jobs, this is of course an invaluable consumer service provided by the wrong hero. In 1996, the places with the most jobs are Chicago, Los Angeles, the Boston, Worcester, Lawrence, Brockton area, New York City, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Houston, and Dallas, Texas. And the places with the least jobs, Sumter, South Carolina, Pocatello, Idaho, Casper, Wyoming, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and at the bottom of the list, Enid, Oklahoma. However, in the year 2006, the places with the most jobs will be Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York City, Detroit, Houston, Philadelphia, and Dallas. And the places with the least jobs will be Jonesboro, Arkansas, Pocatello, Idaho, Casper, Wyoming, Pine Bluffs, Arkansas, and Enid, Oklahoma. Yes, American demographics is just full of fascinating data, I say as I pick my nose. Now here's what folks consider to be bad manners. 94% say littering, 90% say not showing up at all for appointments, 85% say smoking when asked not to, as opposed, I suppose, to smoking when asked to. 75% say not saying thank you. 66% say putting someone on hold a long time. 58% say serving leftovers to company. 54% say not returning phone calls. 21% say not responding to an invitation. And 14% say being late for an appointment. To say nothing, of course, of being late for work. Not considered a very strong career move. Well, I mentioned earlier in this presentation, and I hope you're all still with me. I kind of doubted that. I suppose most of you fell off at about 10 minutes in. But of course, if you did that, then you're not here. Or maybe what you did was you left after like 10 minutes and then you came back to see if I was still on. And sure enough, here I am. Hi. How good to see you. Tell me how be you. And tell me one more thing. Are you from Dixie? Hooray for Dixie! Anyway, talking about the prison industrial complex that I mentioned earlier in this presentation. At Hocking Penitentiary, all security personnel regularly participate in special training. They cover their eyes with yellow saran wrap, stuff their ears with cotton balls, bind up their finger joints with paper strips, pull on rubber gloves, and walk with kernels of corn in their shoes. In this way, they learn to empathize with old, feeble, hard-of-hearing inmates with poor eyesight, arthritic joints, numb fingers, and aching feet. So if you're going to be put away for about 50 years, Hocking Penitentiary is the place to be. Well, Jimmy Carter. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, Jimmy Carter, he was a lot better. He was a better president than most people give him credit for." But according to Michael Kamen, whoops, just cut myself. Unlike his highly facile successor, he lacked a coherent, larger vision and constantly tried to reconcile incompatible recommendations from his advisors. When Ronald Reagan had scant interest in details or even accuracy, Mr. Carter was obsessed with detail. He could see the policy peanuts, but not always the broad fields in which they grew. As for Bill Clinton, he became our first chief executive known for horsemanship, as in H-O-A-R-S-E. Because he had this hoarse voice from talking too much. Sort of like, well. Ghostwriting is an esoteric art requiring psychological transference. The now unfashionable presidential synthesis approach to American history, which relates the national past, is no more than a sequence of presidential administrators. As Nixon said to Haldeman, real problem is we don't have a real PR operator at a very high level who really works at this all day, every day. Gee, then why the hell didn't they just hire one? By the way, here's an Ole Miss update. University of Mississippi, popularly known as Ole Miss. In 1975, they elected a black football player to one of the principal campus leadership positions, that of, yes, Colonel Rebel, according to Adam Nossiter. All of the previous citations have been from the New York Times Book Review of May 4th, 1997. Well, Zaire changed their name to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and of course, as one wag was proud of saying, any place that calls itself a democratic republic usually isn't. Popocatépetl, the name of which means smoking mountain, in Mexico, has been belching ash for weeks, which is bad news for all those folks that live in Mexico City. Mobutu, bad news. Zaire despot loses power. Good news. Gets to keep leopard skin hat, says Newsweek's Conventional Wisdom Watch of May 26, 1997. Bill Clinton apologizes for 1932 Tuskegee experiments. What about 1996 campaign finance experiments? Landreau. If new election called, faces Billy Towson, not Woody Jenkins. GOP says gambling interests, not Landreau, may be complicit in the fraudulent Louisiana election. Oh, and Heaven's Gate was big in the news around that time. And of course, in the library of the folks who were responsible for bringing us Heaven's Gate were the following books. They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. How to Start Your Own Country. How to Manipulate the Media. The Ashes of Waco. An Observer's Guide to Comet Hale-Bopp. The Complete Book of Wills and Estates. The Complete Book of Script Writing. World's Best Card Tricks. And The Joys of Cheesecake. Well, it was just another Jim Jones alert. It's funny how history repeats itself. First time is tragedy, the second time is farce. Well, that's not strictly true, but first there was Jim Jones, now there's Heaven's Gate. All these Gates scandals, Watergate, Iran-Gate, Finance-Gate. Pretty soon Bill Gates is going to be in hot water. They'll call it Gatesgate. New York, where for years compassion was the generic rationale for folly, says George F. Will. Well, I don't know what kind of folks he hangs around in New York City, but it never seemed to be a particularly compassionate place to begin with. About as compassionate as the upper echelons of Harvard, as far as I can tell, and both run by the same sorts of people, incidentally. Well, according to John Koreski in U.S. News and World Report of May 26th, speaking as a former community volunteer, I will never volunteer again. Why? Egocentric power trippers whose sole qualification for leadership is longevity within the organization, conflicting directives, multiplicity of bosses, pathetic communication skills, disregard for basic management tenets, and cliquish attitudes all result in wasted time and maddening frustration. One disgruntled volunteer speaks out. Haley Barbour is being misleading about the GOP foreign contributions, according to U.S. News and World Report, or at least that's the word on the street. According to William J. Holstein, we are experiencing the second industrial revolution. You know, during the first industrial revolution, nobody had the wit, or at least the prescience, to attempt to place a value on the earth and its goods. However, in the current industrial revolution, we do have such a value-added structure. I think I will resume this at another time. Thank you for tuning in. Well, so this ends our presentation for tonight, except we still have 10 minutes to go. I hope you don't mind too terribly 10 minutes of utter darkness, but just consider the utter darkness that I've been blundering through for much of my career. Take that into consideration, if you will, and then you won't be moaning so much about technical competence or consideration to the viewer. Anyway, perhaps the most dysphoric insight of all is that the Earth is worth $33 trillion. The ocean is worth $8.4 trillion. All the insects, bats, and birds in the world are worth $117 billion. The tropical forests are worth $3.8 trillion. The coral reefs are worth $375 billion. And all the animals and insects in the world are worth $417 billion. So let's see. Can I have all the animals and insects in the world? That'll be $417 billion. Tell you what, just leave out the insects. Just give me the animals, the bats, and the birds. Okay. Let's see, that'll be $300 billion, plus tax. Tax? Yep, 5% of $300 billion. Let's see. 5%. Let's see, 10% of $300 billion would be $30 billion, so 5% would be $315 billion, please. But all I have is $300 billion. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you all the animals, but not the bats. And it'll save you about $15 billion. Okay, fine, who needs them? Then all the animals in the world, minus the bats and insects, but with the birds. Fine, solid. Besides, the bats and the insects would be lonely without each other. If it weren't for the bats, then the insects would overrun the world, so I'm doing the world a favor by taking all its animals, but leaving it its bats and insects. And speaking of bats, I guess this is about as good a time as any to say, to give forth with this following quote by Rich Lowry, quoted from the New Republic of the National Review of June 2nd. You can see, we're already into June. Perhaps no politician in American life has a record so deeply at odds with itself as Dick Gephardt. His views don't just evolve. One version of his political personality went extinct as another sprang up in its place. A Beltway J. Gatsby, who wiped away his past to advance his ambitions and, in an unhappy twist, today finds himself in a tougher political position as a result. His dad was a milkman turned real estate agent. He was inspired by the power of positive thinking, made his political start as an untouchable alderman, Little Dickie Do-Right they called him, in a St. Louis known for its shady politics. Gore and Gephardt have obvious similarities. They're both part of that passionless, careerist generation of blow-dried, baby-boom-era television politicians, says Tony Michael, former DNC press secretary. Oh boy, I hope there's more
red-hot steaming poop about Dick Gephardt, and there is. Gephardt has an eerie, almost android quality about him, as spontaneous as a metronome. He was asked how he developed his listening skills. I don't think you can be a good listener unless you're a good listener. I think it's something that you really have to do, and if you really do it, then you can do it. If you don't do it, then you can't do it. I mean, that sounds pretty android-like to me. And who was he being interviewed by at the time? None other than Mother Jones, an android publication if ever there were. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to knock Mother Jones. Or for that matter, Mother Bloor. But, there's been something strangely mechanical about it. I've always felt that way. In a Gore-Gephardt race, Gephardt would represent the old-style strategy of starting with the base of unions, minorities, and other democratic interest groups, then buying the middle-class elderly with entitlement to demagoguery and Reagan Democrats with protectionism. Gore would put much more emphasis on Clinton administration centrism. The question is whether Gore will actually stand and fight. Gore seems inclined to go the pander route. Dick Morris calls Gephardt God's gift to Al Gore because he provides Gore such a ready, liberal foil. Well, it could be a very crowded race in the year 2000, but perhaps it's too soon to discuss it. Then again, perhaps it's never too soon. As if Scott Fitzgerald said in Harper's, cited in Harper's from June 1997, don't get thinking it's a real country because you can get a lot of high school kids into gym suits and have them spell out bananas for the newsreel. Too many people in New York, says Lewis Lapham, fail to appreciate the purpose of the federal government, which is to promote the illusion of progress while at the same time preserving the comfort and convenience of the status quo. The substance of change brings with it the bitterness of lamentation and restraint. The appearance of change requires only the staging of words. He goes on to say, embracing the platitudes of the moment, postponing the difficult decisions until the next committee meeting or the next election, defining the passions likely to excite a dormant electorate as disruptions that must be smoothed over, not as questions that must be answered or responsibilities that must be met. According to this, Gingrich is as bright-eyed and cocksure as an alert parrot. Trent Lott has an unctuous grin, assimilating both the promises of a television evangelist and the sympathies of a funeral director. His tan, like his smile, appeared to have been applied with a brush. As for Dick Armey, an affable man in an earnest suit, as amiable as tapioca, and as innocent as a sunflower, stolid and ox-like calm. Sounds to me like he kind of likes Army. Well, according to The Economist magazine of May 17th, in Texas, spending on the poor is as popular as a rattlesnake as a picnic. Since the 1970s, American social policy has been drifting steadily towards private provision. Government may still be the arranger, but private companies are increasingly the administrators. Well, there was a big brouhaha about the Odyssey because of the televised version, which I'm sure purists everywhere were aghast concerning. But according to Robert Bagels, who recently translated the Odyssey into a contemporary English translation, the Odyssey describes a world coming to terms with the end of a prolonged war that divided civilization into two ideological blocks. So that means, of course, that Mr. Translator here seems to think that it has a special resonance to our current predicament or situation or whatever you want to call it. And perhaps it does. Perhaps it does. Well, I'm the wrong hero. This has been Dysphoria, and I certainly hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. Sorry about the last 10 minutes being in blanco vision, but I guess it just sort of falls in with the theme of the program tonight, or at least so I would have you think. So this has been Cafe Cabaret. Please tune in next week when we bring you our presentation, number 18 in a series of 24. I never thought I'd get this far, and I'm calling it PAP, which incidentally was also my grandfather's nickname, but that is neither here nor there. If it's neither here nor there, then where outside of Heisenberg's theory of uncertainty, his uncertainty principle, if it's neither here nor there, then where is it? Where is it? Well, if we run out of stuff to talk about, I can always read from Oriana Fallaci's interview with Henry Kissinger. So, anyhow, good night all. Glad you tuned in. Glad you were able to tune in. Glad that you're still healthy. For God's sake, always remember, you're nothing without your health. Without your health, everything is worthless. I mean, you can be as rich as you want, but if you don't have your health, you can be a property landowner, you can be a millionaire, but if you don't have your health, in other words, if you're a poor but healthy ox,